So hello and welcome to the video. It's now been 2 months since BA gave us that wonderful belated Christmas present of announcing that they're killing off the Executive Club and replacing it with the Club. This was advertised as a wonderful new scheme which, ironically, will pretty much only allow executives to achieve status given the ridiculously high spending thresholds that have been introduced. The timing of BA's announcement was very calculated, coming between Christmas and New Year, where most of the travel media is going to be on holiday. It also came at a very bad time for me, as I already had 2 big trips planned for January and then February. So I had virtually no time to react beyond the video that I released on the 2nd of January. But I have been thinking really hard about it while I've been on the road. I've read dozens of articles and I've read thousands of comments. And from digesting all of them, I now have a pretty clear idea of what I'm going to do. So in this video, which I think will end up being quite a long one, I'm going to try and do 3 things. Firstly, there's been a couple of developments since that initial announcement, which I'll talk about briefly. Briefly, as these changes are really pretty trivial. Secondly, I had a very strong response to that earlier video and quite a few very interesting offline communications, some of which I'd like to share with you. And finally, I'm going to share the process that I've gone through in determining my new loyalty strategy. That's led me to a provisional conclusion, and I think that process might be useful for you to follow, and that conclusion may be one that you end up sharing. So if that sounds good, stick around. Hi, I'm Matt and this is Matt's Planet. I aim to entertain, educate and inspire with my travel adventures from planning to execution. I'll show you how you can travel in style for a lot less than you'd think. So subscribe so you can come with me. Now I'm not going to go through the changes again. That has been done comprehensively elsewhere, including less comprehensively by me in that original video. The bottom line is that achieving status with BA is now largely defined by spending. Determining that spend is unnecessarily complicated, as you can't include any true taxes and fees included in the fare that you buy. I say true taxes and fees as any carrier surcharge that BA sneakily includes and calls a tax does actually count towards that spend. £7,500 of that net spending will get you to silver and £20,000 of net spending will get you to gold. I said largely driven by spend, as BA can only see how much you did spend on a flight if you fly with them, with Iberia or with American Airlines. When you fly on other OneWorld airlines where BA can't see how much it cost, the new tier points you earn will be driven by the distance flown. I'll drop a link to the various tables in the description below, but a flight on Qatar Airways from London to Singapore via Doha is about 7,109 miles. So a return flight to Singapore in cheapo economy will earn you 4% of those miles flown, which is 569 new tier points in total. Which means you'll need to do that trip 13 and a bit times to get to silver, and gold will require 35 and a bit return trips. That flight seems to cost around £725, so you'd be spending over £9,500 to get silver and £25,500 to get gold if you obtain status that way, which of course no one is going to do. If you travel that route on a discounted business class fare, you'll earn 25% of the miles flown, which is 3,555 new tier points for a return trip. That means you'll need to make 2 and a bit round trips for silver and 5.5 round trips for gold. That flight seems to cost around £3,500, so you'd be spending £7,400 for silver and just under £20,000 for gold. These numbers are so close to the spend qualifications for flying on IAG airlines that I really don't believe it's a coincidence. One positive to these changes, and it is hard to find positives, so let's jump on one when we can find it, is that there's no longer a requirement to fly on any BA flights at all to achieve gold. Previously you need to fly on 4 BA flights to secure gold. So there does seem to be a small opportunity here, and if your employer requires you to travel in accordance with those patterns anyway, it might actually be a real opportunity for you. And I quoted Qatar fares ex-London, which are some of their more expensive flights. Now, if you could get flights for half that price, say 1,750 quid from somewhere in Europe to somewhere in Asia, which is often possible in sales, that would halve the spending requirement to about £3,800 for silver and perhaps £10,000 for gold. Now, that's a lot more than you used to have to spend, but it is a much cheaper pathway to status than from flying on BA itself. And you may be able to do better on partner airlines. I've not done an exhaustive review, but you'd need to find long, cheap flights under a discounted business fare, but I'd not be surprised to find it was possible to get BA Gold status through flying on OneWorld partner airlines for maybe £8,000. Still a lot, but better than flying on BA. Just for fun, and we are groping around to find fun in all of this, I looked at the old Sri Lankan run from Abu Dhabi to Jakarta. Return trips used to cost about £800 each, with the return delivering 560 old tier points, meaning you'd need to do it 3 times to get to gold. Sri Lankan's discounted business fares now only earn you 12.5% of miles flown, compared to 25% earned on Qatar, Finnair or JAL. Which feels like a real insult to Sri Lankan if you think about it, and Cathay Pacific will only earn you 12.5% of miles flown on their cheapest discounted business class fare as well. So as that route to Jakarta is just over 8,000 miles there and back, you'd earn just over 1,000 new tier points for each return trip, which means instead of it taking 3 returns to get you to gold, it will now take you 20. Even without the recent price increase on that routing, the Sri Lankan run is definitely dead. So I got a little bit distracted there, but it does bring me to one of the changes that has been announced, which is that there is now an alternate way of getting to bronze or silver status based on the number of sectors flown rather than on the spend. Like under the old scheme, you could fly 25 sectors and achieve bronze status and 50 sectors to achieve silver. And they need to be flights with a BA flight number, so cheapo domestic flights on Iberia or American Airlines won't count. Plus, there's no route to getting to gold based on sectors flown. Bronze holds relatively little value, so you'd be looking at 50 sectors to get to silver, which is where the lounge access kicks in. Now, why this has been brought back is quite interesting. BA's press release about the change contained the usual gaslighting nonsense about responding to customer wishes and the like. But Head for Points reports that this change was made, in part at least, in response to outrage from staff. And I've seen it suggested elsewhere that this change was made, in part at least, as a result of outrage from BA's unions. Apparently, a large number of BA staff commute to work by air and achieve status to make that experience more pleasant through the number of sectors that they flew. And I also understand that the unions believe that the removal of this route to status was a material change to the terms and conditions of employment, and could have landed BA in a world of trouble had they not backtracked. No idea if that's true or not, and I'm sure it's completely unrelated that a week after making this change, BA was able to agree a deal with the unions whereby BA's staff, for the first time in BA's history I believe, are now remunerated with the inclusion of a profit share programme. It's great for the staff, congratulations to them. It's just a bit of a shame that BA's not going to be making profits anymore because so many of its loyal customers are moving their business elsewhere. So that's 50 BA coded flights credited to the BA club to get you silver. And I'll mention here that if you credit 46 flights anywhere on the OneWorld network to Royal Jordanian scheme, they'll give you the equivalent of gold. And that's any flight. They can be those cheapo Iberia or American Airlines domestic flights. Just saying, and I'll come back to the alternatives to BA a little bit later on. The other change announced was that bonus tier points will now be added to flights booked in 2025. Not many bonus tier points, but I suppose they all count, and the phrase lipstick on a pig springs to mind when describing this change. I'll also mention here that BA has not announced the spend that you'd be required to put through your co-branded American Express card to trigger the 2,500 new tier points that are promised. And that would be a third of what you would need to achieve the new silver status. It's widely assumed that they'll announce that at £25,000, but they haven't, and it is wildly perplexing as to why they haven't. It does make you wonder if that's a lever they want to keep hold of until the very last moment, only to pull it in reaction to what they've seen happen since they made those first announcements. If they were to wind that lever back to, say, £10,000, that would be a major concession and would be a really big clue that BA realises that they pitched it wrong to start off with. It is really annoying that we are now only 5 weeks away from the new club launching, and we still don't know, which makes it really difficult for people to plan ahead. If people were able to get 2,500 new tier points through spending they're already planning, that would make a really big decision in how they plan the rest of their year's travel. But no, BA is keeping it to themselves. And one quick more thing to mention on this general topic. BA recently announced a very short-lived promotion where you could boost the last year's Avios that you earned. Usually you can only boost Avios earned in the last 30 days. Plus they upped the maximum you could boost those Avios to 4 times from the usual 3. They ran a 3 times your annual earnings promotion 2 years ago. I don't think they ran one last year, so it is quite interesting that they've run one again this year. It's the sort of quick hit, cash generative initiative that companies tend to flop out when they really need cash. And that makes me think that BA did it in reaction to an unexpected drop in forward bookings. I've seen hundreds of comments from people saying that they are taking their business elsewhere, and it would not surprise me at all if BA was surprised by that and that Avios Boost initiative was one of their reactions to it. So what did I learn from the reaction I got to my first video? Well, probably the largest area of discussion was the legality of what BA had done. One thing that seems immediately clear is that they didn't give adequate notice of these changes according to their own terms and conditions. They were required to provide 6 months notice of any changes according to clause 7.4 of the terms and conditions, and clause 28 requires them to give reasonable notice, and I don't think 3 months notice of a change this big is reasonable. I know a number of people challenged them on this, but the changes are going ahead, so I don't think anyone had success in blocking it. But even if BA did postpone or even stop these changes, I'm not sure I'd want to go back to them because the trust I had has been lost. I heard from a chap who has 94,500 lifetime tier points, which put him only 5,500 away from achieving lifetime gold guest list status. That would have cost him maybe £10,000–12,000 under the old scheme, and he would have got there quite naturally based on his normal travel patterns in the next 2, maybe 3 years. But the new threshold for gold guest lists for life is 1.5 million new tier points, which is about £2 million of spend once you exclude the taxes. So the 5,500 old tier points he needed translates to being about £100,000 of gross spending under this new scheme. That's about 10 times what he was expecting to have to pay. Now this is all first world problems, don't get me wrong, but he was really unhappy with this, and I heard from a number of other people on a similar cliff edge when it comes to gold for life status. So I've heard that a few lawyers have looked at this specific situation and they've really struggled to pick out the existence of a contract between us as consumers and BA when it comes to lifetime status. There's no specific consideration passing from the customer to the airline in return for this lifetime status specifically, and consideration is a necessary element of a contract which gives you the basis of pursuing BA. Plus, no loss can be identified. The benefits you're losing out on are future theoretical benefits rather than current quantifiable ones. So unfortunately, I think everyone who is in this cliff edge situation is just beep out of luck. That specific individual has decided to bite the bullet and run around the world enough to generate the 5,500 tier points he's short before the scheme changes on the 31st of March. He shared his itinerary with me and it is pretty bonkers. It's actually brilliantly bonkers, and he is actually sharing the experience through a thread on Flyer Talk if you want to follow along, and I'll put that link in the description below as well. Good luck to him. Two more very quick things when we're talking about the legals. Firstly, BA had a clause inserted in its agreements with all US-based executive club members, prohibiting them from participating in class actions. I doubt very many people realised that when they were signing up for the executive club in the United States, but it is there, and I'm sure BA is thrilled that it is there. It looks like BA's legal team is a lot more switched on and joined up than their IT team is. And finally, I was approached by a journalist from the Financial Times about an article they were writing about these changes and about frequent flyer schemes in general. And I ended up being the opening gambit of the article. Matt Jones is no ordinary frequent flyer. I'll pop a link to the article in the description below. The FT is behind a paywall, but the article seems to have been reproduced in full in the Australian Financial Review. It's a shame only 11 people read the Financial Times and only 8 people read the Australian Financial Review, but it is something I will treasure. It's a good article too, and the journalist told me that nobody from BA would actually speak to him about it. All they did was rehash the announcement that they'd previously made. And that's a point that's worth making here, which is that BA's leadership team has been deafeningly silent here when it comes to defending these changes in public. Which actually supports one of the better theories I heard about why all of this is happening, which is that the IAG loyalty team has made BA do it, and that the BA executive team hates it as much as we do and doesn't really want to put their head above the parapet to defend something that they don't fundamentally agree with. No idea if there's any truth in that, but it does sound plausible to me. So the final question is, well, what am I going to do? Well, I have gold status with BA until September, and I should soft land to silver until April next year, so there's no real hurry. It's still unclear and unconfirmed whether soft landings will remain, but I'm going to assume they will. So there's no real imperative for me to do anything anytime soon, and I therefore have the benefit of being able to wait a little bit longer to see how things develop. What I am going to do is get the maximum value out of the status I have, and I am actively looking at ways of getting myself to places like Hong Kong and New York again while I still have gold status to enjoy those first-class lounges while I still can. Beyond that, my thought process has really followed a 4-step process, a process that I'd encourage you guys to go through too. The first step is to ask yourself, well, do I really need status at all? And in all honesty, for Matt Jones, the civilian, given my relatively light volume of personal travel these days, plus the fact that when I do travel, it tends to be in a premium cabin, the answer really is no. Particularly if the realistic status bucket for me to achieve going forward is silver rather than gold. There's very little that silver status gives you over and above flying in business class anyway. Gold does bring some extra benefits, but if it was just me and silver was the objective, I probably wouldn't bother. But I have a channel where I talk about this stuff, and it generates income for me, which allows me to be a bit more ambitious in terms of my ambitions when travelling. So I think I will still pursue OneWorld status. I still have gold status in Star Alliance through Aegean, and I think it makes business sense for me to continue to pursue OneWorld status one way or another. Perhaps my days in the Pier Lounge in Hong Kong are not at an end. So if you come to the conclusion that status is still for you, then the second question is whether you're going to grit your teeth and stick it out with BA. Which may stick in the craw for some, and I'm not sure I could live with myself if I forgave them and stuck around with them given everything they've done, but for some it might make sense. And if you do, you may find that the lounges are wonderfully quiet in a couple of years' time once us riff-raff have worked our way through the system. And this may be an option for you if you spend a lot of money on holidays. Under the new system, your spend on flight and hotel bookings and flight and car bookings will count towards your status in terms of new tier points. And it will count in full too. There will be no deductions for the tax component. Hotel and car bookings on their own won't count, you have to have a flight attached, and the old 5-day rule to get double tier points goes away too. There's no minimum duration requirement going forward. The catch though is that a spend made for a group of people will result in the points from that spend being distributed evenly amongst all participants. And if a participant isn't a member of the executive club, those points will just get lost. So what some people are doing, particularly if their hotel spend is significant, is to book one flight and all of the accommodation through one member of the executive club's account and then have all of the other participants buy their own flights separately. That means that the spend for the accommodation will end up solely in one person's account. All you need to then do is ring up the hotel that you've booked and say, oh, there will actually be 6 people staying in that 3-bedroom apartment that I booked rather than the one it looks like on the booking. And most hotels will be okay with that if you talk to them. And if you do that a couple of times a year and tend to stay in expensive hotels, it might be quite easy for you to get silver status, particularly with that credit card booster. And I've seen reports from a number of people that their organic spending, if organised in this particularly strategic way, should quite easily get them to gold. And good luck to them, and good luck to you if that's a realistic option for you now as well. But if you can't stomach giving BA any more of your money, even if you could still hang on to status, then it's time to look elsewhere. But there are some elements of BA status that you will be surrendering if you do indeed go elsewhere. I'll mention a few. BA's customer service is not world class, but it is occasionally excellent, and it may not be with another airline that you have got status with. The customer service experience with Japan Airlines or with Royal Air Maroc may not be quite what you're used to. It might not be so convenient in terms of the time zones that you have available to communicate with them. And it might not end up being a very efficient experience. BA Gold status does open up additional reward inventory, which is something I have taken advantage of in the post and will lose. But if you can't retain status with BA, or you won't, then it is time to move on. And the third question then is whether to stick with OneWorld. And that will depend on flight patterns. I've seen a number of people who, now they are unshackled from feeling that they have to fly on BA, have taken KLM or SAS on a business trip, and they've been sort of rejuvenated by how good the experience was. Maybe not much better than BA, but certainly not much worse. And they've perhaps been able to travel from an airport much closer to home, which has saved them a lot of time. So if you reach this stage, approach it with a blank sheet of paper and work out what your flight patterns really are going to be, see which airlines satisfy them and see which alliance makes most sense for you. And if OneWorld ends up not being the answer to that question, you should probably ask yourself the question of why you were with BA in the first place. A quick word on status matches here, as there are a few of them out there at the moment as people try and scoop up BA's disaffected customers. EasyJet has even launched one, and I'd expect more to come along soon. Be very cautious. It can be instantly gratifying to get a match. But the real question is whether you can sustain that status beyond that initial matching period. When I chose my Star Alliance airline, I chose Aegean, not because they were the easiest to achieve status with. I could have got an immediate match from Turkish or TAP, but Aegean has proven to be the easiest airline in the Star Alliance group to retain status with, something I've done 3 times now. So by all means take a match if you want to see what the competition looks and feels like, but put some thought into how readily you're going to be able to sustain it. Matches are usually only available once per lifetime, and it's easy to make a mistake and burn your matching opportunity by taking short-term convenience over medium-term pragmatism. If OneWorld is the answer, then the final question is quite a tricky one. In the responses I received to my first video, people recommended just about every other OneWorld Alliance airline as being the perfect one to move my business to, with the exception of Royal Air Maroc, which got 0 points in that particular competition. Alaskan, Cathay, Finnair, Qatar, even Qantas all got strong advocacy in the comments. And that's where this video may disappoint you a little, because I really can't answer that question for you. I can answer it for me, and I will do shortly, but there are so many moving parts to everyone's individual decision making that I really can't provide one answer that will suit everyone. Indeed, it is quite telling that as far as I know, there isn't any single video out there on YouTube which actually really does this. The best I have found is a document which outlines some of the OneWorld alternatives. It's a very good document, and I have spoken to its author and they're very happy for me to share it with you, although they want to remain private and don't want to take any credit for the work that went into it. And I'll put a link to it in the description below. So what am I going to do? Well, as I said, I've already got Star Alliance covered, and as BA is my home airline, I really think there is value in retaining status with one or other of the OneWorld partners. But there's one consideration that I've not talked about yet, which is Avios. I really like them, and I am still likely to accumulate a fair number of them at a very low price in the way I've described in this video here. So sticking with an airline that is going to continue to contribute Avios to my pot seems to make good sense for me. And if I earn status in OneWorld with one airline and do my redemptions through BA still, well, that will still work. It's the same model I have for Star Alliance. I earn status with Aegean but do most of my redemptions through Air Canada. And as I've said before, I don't think a massive devaluation from BA is likely. Indeed, I think it is quite difficult for BA to devalue Avios now, as they are used by airlines more broadly than just the IAG group. So sticking with Avios gives me a choice of 6 airlines. Currently, the number of airlines using Avios is growing, and I would expect it to continue to grow. Aer Lingus and Loganair aren't in the OneWorld Alliance. There's not a lot of point collecting with them if you're pursuing OneWorld status. BA is out, and I'm also going to exclude Iberia. They've also recently announced changes to their loyalty program which mirror BA's in many ways. Although as their spending is based in euros rather than pounds, they do have a 20% advantage over BA. But they still have 7,500 and 20,000 as the targets for silver and gold. So that leaves Qatar and Finnair. I've mentioned this before and I will talk about it more in an upcoming video, but in the future I see my travel patterns involving far more travel eastwards from the UK than westwards. And as I think the airline you pursue status with should be one that you actually fly on quite regularly, both of those airlines remain in contention based on that criteria. And as Qatar's network is significantly larger than Finnair's, my instinct is to pursue status with them. So my first attempt at this next bit didn't really work, so a couple of days later, let's try again. So their scheme is based on sectors flown, not on spend, so it's the sort of scheme that throws out opportunities for optimization. And flights booked into first class within the Gulf region tends to be overweight in the rewards that they deliver. For example, you can fly from Kuwait to Doha to Muscat and then back again for about £1,000 less if you can find that fare in a sale. And it will give you 80 points towards status, and if you can accumulate 600 points within 12 months, they will give you the equivalent of BA Gold. So you need to repeat that run 8 times to get gold, and at £1,000 a go, it's going to be about £8,000. Which is a lot, but if you already have other OneWorld travel planned and you need to do that 2 or 3 times to top yourself up to gold, then maybe it's not a bad option. They aren't going to be long flights either, so you can knock them out pretty quickly, and each time you transit Doha, you'll be doing so as a first class passenger, which will give you access to the rather excellent Al Safwa lounge. The downside is that status with Qatar only lasts for a year. Qatar's years roll with activity rather than being fixed as BA's are. So that's £8,000 a year to maintain status if you start from 0, rather than it being every other year as is possible with BA by taking advantage of their grace periods. But Qatar does offer soft landing, so if you're effectively paying £4,000 a year on average for a year of gold followed by a year of silver, I mean, that's not completely terrible. It's a little complicated because of the moving years to work out precisely how to optimise it. But it's not a terrible option, particularly as having high status with Qatar brings other perks, some of which are really quite good. Finnair's scheme is rather like BA's in that flights on the home airline, which in this case is just Finnair, earn you status points based on spend, whereas flights on OneWorld partner airlines, which is every other airline except for Finnair, earn you status points based on the miles flown. So with their scheme, you are again looking for long, cheap flights in premium cabins. That Kuwait to Muscat trip works quite well for Qatar status, but it would be terrible in Finnair's scheme. You'd have to do that trip 34 times, crediting to Finnair, to get the equivalent of BA Gold, and £34,000, that's ridiculous. But on the other hand, BA's ex-EU fares, the sorts of ones we used to look at for tier point runs, well, they actually work quite well into the Finnair scheme. So you could do the old style tier point run from Dublin to the west coast of the US, and you need to do it 4.5 times to get the equivalent of gold status through Finnair. And that might cost you about £1,500 each time, which means you'd get BA equivalent gold for about £7,000. That's still a lot more than it used to cost doing it on BA, but each trip is going to be a little bit easier because it's based on miles flown, which means you can fly directly from London to Los Angeles without having to add all those intermediate flights to rack up the number of legs, which was the way the old qualification basis worked with BA. Finnair is also quite generous in terms of the benefits it gives to its top tier flyers, particularly when it comes to upgrade vouchers. And there are many other dimensions to the scheme, but one I do want to mention in particular is that Finnair is very unusual in allowing you to trade avios for status points. So if you get your avios in bulk at a very low cost, as I tend to do, there is a very handy shortcut to status available through Finnair. 120,000 avios will get you halfway towards their platinum status, which is the equivalent of BA Gold. And the final point is that Finnair's membership years are fixed, and the scheme works in the same way as BA's in that you earn status for the year you're in and for the next one. I don't believe they have grace periods, but if you time it right, it means that one flurry of travel can get you status for just under 2 years. So I've not made a final decision, but it does feel like my shortlist is down to 2 airlines. Although my instinct may be to go towards Qatar, at the end of the day the maths might lead me towards Finnair. Especially if you can get halfway there through converting avios, and if you buy those avios using the BA Boost function, they might cost you about £1,100. And now Finnair uses avios, it is very easy to move them between the schemes. So over the next month or two, I'm going to do a detailed video about each of those schemes, and I'm going to really study the best ways of getting status through them. But sadly, neither is going to give me gold status at anywhere near the price I used to get away with by pursuing status through BA. And the outro I originally recorded still works. So there you go. It's been a long video, but I thought it better to cram it all into one rather than splitting it into 2. I don't need to take a decision on where my loyalty is going to go for a year or more. And things may well change, but I hope my thought process now will be of use to those of you who have a shorter time window in order to make these sorts of decisions. And I have to say, spending some time on Qatar Airways and in the Middle East is really not a bad prospect as I sit here today. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Give the video a like, subscribe if you're new, please leave a comment, what are you going to do? And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account link in the script below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.